Hi guys, welcome back to the next Spotlight Master session, and today we'll be discussing why negative gearing will never be abolished. But first and foremost, we will be discussing housekeeping. Well, not we, but she, Amanda.
Housekeeping, my favorite thing. Okay, so very quickly, because I know you've all been to these before. So your broker and your accountant, they are your professional team. They give you access to your money. They keep you tax compliant. So obviously, whatever they say goes. We are strategic partners as your buyer's agent. The advice we give today, if you look at our disclaimer, is general in nature. We have not taken an assessment of your individual circumstances. We are pitching to a broad audience based on the feedback that we receive from clients. We structure these classes based on what the general sentiment is out there. So apply what works for you, disregard what doesn't. And of course, if you want to book a call in with Dragan to discuss more specifically what works or doesn't work for you, feel free. We'll pop up the QR code in a minute. But first, I want to show where this class fits in the broader picture of all our spotlights. So hopefully you're working your way through them all. It doesn't really matter in what order you do. Pick the ones that interest you the most, but do try to catch them in their pairs. So as you can see, each line has a pair of webinars that go together. So today's masterclass on negative gearing pairs up with rental housing as a form of welfare. So it's probably better to watch that one before coming to this one, but they go together.
Yeah.
So today we're talking about why negative gearing will never be abolished. And the reason for this is that it's been a topic fairly recently in the media where some people feel that it should be abolished and some people feel that it shouldn't. So we're not going to necessarily give an opinion on that. We're just going to show why it won't be, because it serves a very specific purpose and there isn't really another way to achieve the same purpose. So until there is another way, we've got negative gearing.
That's right. And guys, feel free to book in a 15-minute discovery session with myself. Have your questions ready. You've got the QR code up here, or go to propertysessions.com.au/15. And happy to answer any questions you may have. We will also bring that QR code up at the end of this spotlight session if you miss out now. So now a little bit about myself. My parents migrated to Australia from former Yugoslavia. I was the only child growing up in a community housing area within Sydney called Redfern. Grew up around kids that did have and I didn't have. So I guess it sort of gave me a little bit of a fire inside of me when I got into my adulthood to have a bit of a drive, I guess, into succeeding. So
Did you say you were a fire-breathing dragon?
I was a fire-breathing dragon. That's for a good one. Very similar to the book we're writing, aren't we? So that sort of created that spark. I merged my passion of photography since I was a teenager into a business in my early 20s. From there, I had my landlord who pushed me into, well, he didn't push me, I forced him into finding out what he did because he looked very successful, and he sort of guided me into property investing. And that's when I sort of started that journey in my early 20s. From there, fast forward, I'm 46 years old now. I've got a decent portfolio myself. I run Buyers Agency Australia, but most importantly, I am teaching my kids and my clients who come on board on things on what to do and things not to do and what to do, and go away from those mistakes from day one. So over to you, Amanda.
Thank you. I never know what to say with these introductions because I don't have as wonderful a history as Drag.
Oh, well.
I'm also a lot younger than him, can you tell? No, look, I've got 20 years property experience as well, mainly because I started a lot younger. My parents drummed it into me from a very young age and didn't give me much of a choice. As you'll see in our other spotlights, my language changes depending on what mood I'm in. Sometimes it's coercion, sometimes it's encouragement. Today, it was definitely coercion. They forced me into property, not forced me, they had very, very, very strong expectations that all three of us kids would invest in property as young as possible. So mum and dad never gave us handouts. They never gave us a deposit or went guarantor or anything, but they did make us work and they did make us save and they did make us buy. One of their rules was no going overseas until you've purchased a property. So you can't, take off and jump on a plane with your mates until you've bought a property. So I think I bought my first property at 21 and I went overseas at 23, which I know is very old compared to a lot of people these days. But I had no choice. We weren't allowed to spend our money on a plane ticket until we had purchased a property. So at the time, I very much begrudged mum and dad. As I said, I now call it coercion. But 20 years later, I'm very grateful for it. So I'll do the same to my kids, and they can hate me all they like as well. But hopefully someday they'll thank me too, because I won't be doing it for them. As I said, no handouts, no deposits, no guarantor. They've got to do it on their own. My parents never compensated for, whatever decisions that we made, but their expectations were clear. And you know what? Looking back 20 years later, I go, how would they have stopped me from getting on a plane? Like, we're in our 20s.
Yeah, but you had that fear of the parents when you were younger.
Massive. Massive. And like, what would they have done?
Probably nothing.
Probably nothing.
But it's that mental fear that was driven into you when you were a child. I know. I had it.
Yeah, there were expectations. And I look back now and I look at my 6-year-old and like the word expectations, she just looks at me and goes, whatever, and runs off. I think, how? Why did I fall for it in my 20s? Oh no, I should have just got on the plane. All right. What is negative gearing and how does it work? So negative gearing, as you've probably picked up on all the times that we've mentioned it up until now, is that it refers to where the rental income does not cover all of the expenses.
Yep.
So the property is operating on a negative cash flow, which creates a shortfall each financial year. So if you listen to our depreciation class or any of the other ones, you'll know that any costs of a property are tax deductible. So the reason I brought up depreciation is because it's not an actual cost that you pay, but it's still a cost that gets deducted. So this is kind of the same thing in the sense that you've already paid out all the, the cost for that property. You've already collected all the rent and there's still a gap even after all that is said and done. So whatever that gap is, whatever negative or shortfall you've got, that amount comes off your taxable income. So a lot of people are of the misconception that people, particularly wealthy people, invest for the purpose of negative gearing. What I need you to understand is that with or without negative gearing, the important thing to remember is that that investment is still operating at a loss, even after negative gearing, because negative gearing is just a deduction on the gap of your tax. So you don't get the full amount back, you only get the tax back. So if it's a $5,000 shortfall and you're in a 50% tax bracket, the top tax bracket, you're only getting half of it back anyway, $2,500. So regardless, it's still operating at a loss. So I've got down the bottom there. Remember, you are still spending money to make money, even if you're utilizing negative gearing as a tax incentive for your investing.
Yep.
So what are the benefits for the average person? So this is where the media kind of feeds this negative narrative surrounding negative gearing, because negative gearing is more beneficial to a higher income earner than an average or a lower income earner. So people kind of run with that and go, oh, well, it's for the rich, it lets the rich, get out of paying tax. Kind of, but again, I want to dispel some of these myths and explain how it works, because people really like to have an opinion, but then not fully understand the complexity of that opinion before they form it. So if we have a look at Jim there, I've just randomly picked him as a middle income earner. I said he's a school teacher on $100K per year.
I wonder where you got that from. Anyway, sorry, go.
Look, I like to relate.
I like throwing my 5 cents in sometimes. Anyway.
You're overvaluing yourself there.
But it's okay.
It's 2 cents.
2 cents.
Okay. I picked Jim because 100K is easy math.
Okay. All right. But yeah.
Nope.
Where did the school teacher come from? So anyway, let's go.
I can always go back into the classroom. Okay, so old mate Jimbo, he's done well for himself. He owns an investment property, but it costs him $25,000 annually whilst only bringing in $20,000 in rent. So Jim is $5,000 short every year. Now that's not $5,000 short at the end of the year, that's week to week cumulatively. So it's about $100 a week out of pocket. He has to have the cash flow to carry that. It's not like it's just decided, at the end of the day you get $5,000. Okay, he's got to carry that negative cash flow. Negative gearing, it's negative cash flow. So it's $5,000 short at the end of the year. So he's in approximately a 30% tax bracket. So his tax bill or his tax refund is about $1,600 because he will have already paid tax on that $5,000 through his teaching salary, and then he gets it back. So he still incurs a net loss of about $3,500. So that property, even after negative gearing, will still be negative because he's only getting back his tax, not the full amount. So for Jim, okay, $3,500, you can kind of cop that on the chin. That's not too bad, right? But there's no need for Jim to do that because it's a fairly negligible amount, right? For that amount, it sort of encouraged Jim to go for something with a higher cash flow, right? Because if interest rates go up, therefore his costs go up, that gap gets bigger, okay? So you've got to make sure that when you're using negative gearing that you run your numbers on things being fluid and moving. So for Jim, it's manageable, but if interest rates go up, it might get a bit hairy for him. Whereas a positive cash flow property for Jim has a bit of buffer built in. So if interest rates go up and it does turn a little bit negative, he's still okay. Now, the next one here, we've got Carly. She's a high income earner and she's earning $400,000 a year. See how I gave the female the higher income? Yeah, two can play this game.
No comment.
So she's on $400,000 a year. So this is where you see why negative gearing will appeal to a higher income earner, right? So she might own a $2.5 million investment property. Her income allows her to borrow more. She's got more purchasing power. But at $2.5 million, your rental yield is nowhere near what Jim's one was, because the higher the property, the rent doesn't quite keep up, right? So Carly's operating at a $30,000 annual shortfall. Okay, we're looking at almost $600 a week out of pocket. That's a lot of money, all right? But someone like Carly on $400K, she can service that, right? Now, at tax time, after she's carried that $600 a week for shortfall, at tax time, she's in the top tax bracket. So she'll get back about $14,000, which is a lot of money, right? For the average Joe, these numbers aren't realistic, right? But for a high income earner, they are. So for Carly, that $14,000 tax refund comes back and, she might put that away or use it towards another deposit, or maybe that's her holiday fund. Who knows, right? But her effective loss is reduced from $30,000 down to about $16,000. But on a $2.5 million property, her capital growth in that same 12-month period is a lot more than $16,000. And I'll just put there as an example, say there was a 5% growth in that property, that's $125K. So it's really easy to justify a $16,000 negative cash flow or even a $30,000 negative cash flow when you've made $125,000 in equity. Now, those sorts of numbers aren't available to everybody. They are only available to higher income earners. So what the government has worked out is, well, if we want investors to invest in higher value properties that renters still want because families and so on need places to live as well, if we want to incentivize investors to invest in these areas, we need to make it worth their while, right? We need to give them a reason to do it. Otherwise, they'll just all pile into that entry-level first home buyer market and buy cheaper cash flow positive investments. Because why wouldn't you, right? Why would you buy a negative cash flow property unless the government gave you an incentive to? So high income earners prefer negative gearing because they have that money each week to put into it, and then they get back their refund and they get their equity and they're happy. For them, those numbers work. Okay, they don't need the high cash flow. They earn that from their job. Carly gets that from her $400K annually. She doesn't need positive cash flow. She wants equity. She's got cash flow from her job. Okay, so different reasons for investing, different rationale, different priorities, different needs. Okay, so this is where us as buyers agents come in as well, because if we had Carly coming to us as a client and we had Jim coming to us as a client, the advice that we give them would look very different.
Yeah, different strategies.
Totally different strategies. Okay, so they're a really good example of the two types of clients that would receive completely different advice based on things like negative gearing or capital growth versus cash flow, because one needs cash flow more than the other, right? So this is where, a service like Dragons can really help you, because you might not know these different incentives that are available at different price points or different income points. Okay. So how does negative gearing actually help? Why do we have it and why will it never be abolished? Because it incentivizes investors to diversify. Okay. If negative gearing was abolished, there would be no reason for Carly to buy something that is 30 grand a year negative. Okay. Even though she still makes 125, we close that gap too much because all we need is interest rates to go up a little bit on $2.5 million. Those interest rates go up a little bit, that 30 grand grows very quickly, right? So to incentivize people like Carly to keep investing in that, we need to give them a reason to. If people like Carly exit, or if people like Carly pivot their strategy to be more like Jim's strategy, where they might start going for higher cash flow properties, then what happens is we have fewer rental properties in a range of markets. So investors will sell and overall rental supply will reduce because people like Carly will just tap out. So we reduce total rental supply, but we also introduce higher competition for entry-level homes because suddenly Carly's not buying the $2.5 million investment. Carly's now competing with Jim for the cash flow positive investments. Okay. So the wealthier investors will now shift focus and they'll buy more affordable properties. Now, those investment grade positive cash flow properties are also your first home buyer homes typically. Okay. So now we've got more competition for first home buyers with investors. Now, who's got deeper pockets, Carly or a first home buyer? We don't want them in the same market. We don't want them competing for the same properties. We want to lead the first home buyers for the first home buyers or the mum and dad investors like Jim. People like Carly don't need to be there. We don't need people like Carly driving up those prices. Carly can stay over there with her negative gearing, right? We need Carly over there. This is why we need negative gearing, okay? Because we need Carly purchasing the $2.5 million homes or the premium homes for families to rent. Because families might not want the entry-level units or houses or further out from the city or whatever. Renters want choice. We need investors to diversify. We need people like Carly to buy a broader range of stock so that renters have choice, okay? So if we lose people like Carly because negative gearing is gone, if we lose Carly, we increase the price of rentals in premium suburbs because we've reduced supply. People like Carly start leaving the market. Now, you'll still get some higher income earners that can justify that shortfall. So the $30,000 instead of the $15,000. You'll still have income earners that can justify that. They won't all leave the market, but the ones that can't justify it without the negative gearing will leave. Okay, they'll start selling and they'll move on. So what happens is supply and demand will fall out of equilibrium because we lose a whole bunch of investors in those premium suburbs, and then those investors relocate to the entry-level suburbs because they don't want the negative cash flow anymore, they need the positive. So you can see that removing negative gearing impacts everybody, not just investors, because you now have wealthier investors competing with first home buyers, you have a shortage of rentals for families, you have all sorts of stuff going on where you've completely destroyed any diversification for rental availability in the market. So negative gearing will never be abolished because we can't disincentivize investors like Carly staying away from first home buyer markets, but also supplying housing to premium renters. We need the Carlys in the market. So,
Flow-on effect to the market.
yeah, does abolishing negative gearing reach further than we realize? Short answer is yeah, it does. So we talked about the consequences there. First home buyers, they can kiss getting into the market goodbye because people like Carly are piling in. Renters can't find homes in premium suburbs or family-friendly areas. Where are they going to go? Can they buy? Or do they have to go where there's more rental supply, which is the entry-level suburbs? Like, where do those families go if there aren't people like Carly providing housing? And we talked about in the partner masterclass that housing is a form of welfare because investors cop a bit of heat about that. So again, do watch these in tandem, the twin masterclasses in tandem, because they kind of inform each other. This one's more about, Carly versus Jim. The other one's more about investors versus getting rid of investors entirely, because they do go together. So this one I just really wanted to attack, the media narrative around negative gearing. So the overall market shift is high demand in lower cost areas will drive up prices. So we start to close that gap in the market and then we lose our floor, our affordable market rises because the demand increases there. It limits affordability at entry-level prices, impacts first home buyers and young families. So removing negative gearing or investment incentives would have ultimately, in the far long term, what we call corporatization of rentals. So once we've pushed all the Carlies out of the market and all your mum and dad investors, because they can't compete with the Carlies once the Carlies move into their territory, we have what's called the corporatization of the rental market. So that's when you'll start having companies form and they'll buy out entire buildings or entire areas or whatever. And you will no longer have a landlord. You'll be renting from a corporation. And it completely changes the landscape. We look at, areas like Manhattan, for example, or, suburbs or towns or cities that are predominantly rentals rather than owner-occupiers. And you have this full corporatization of their housing structure where owner-occupiers are few and far between and most properties are rentals owned by corporations. In Australia, we're not there yet. We're heading there. We're probably a couple of generations away. But if we remove things like negative gearing and we lose our mum and dad investors, we start heading down this path of corporatization. And it gets hairy, as we've seen. And as well in Australia, we do still have a strong owner-occupier market. The Australian dream is to buy a house. I can see that is slowly dying and becoming less culturally ingrained. But historically and culturally, it has always been the Australian dream. And we want to hold on to that culturally for as long as possible, because while people are owning their own homes, they have security and they don't have this rental culture that for now Australia hasn't fed into, but we are heading that way. So things like negative gearing just protect us or insulate us a little bit longer from those kinds of influences. So I just wanted to be really clear with these twin masterclasses, even though they're a little bit shorter and not as meaty as the others. I think that it's really important to understand the game or the field that you're entering as an investor and why it is the way it is and how it functions the way it functions. Because if you're going to participate in it, it's in your interest to understand it at every level.
Definitely. Thank you, Amanda. Guys, as you see here, we've got the QR code. Please scan that code if you are willing to jump on a 15-minute discovery session with myself. Any questions you may have, whatever they may be. If you're looking to invest or just wanting to ask some questions, book yourself in. Otherwise, you can go to propertysessions.com.au/15. Until the next Spotlight Masterclass, we'll see you then. Thank you, Amanda.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.